There is a land where ancient olive trees, over 2,000 years old, still bear fruit, where 3 religions claim the same holy sites as sacred, where archaeological layers reveal civilizations spanning millennia, and where a conflict that began over a century ago continues shaping millions of lives. This is the land between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, known as Palestine for centuries and now divided between Israel and Palestinian territories, where the past and present collide, daily creating realities that are simultaneously beautiful and heartbreaking. The story is not simple hatred or ancient rivalries, but modern politics rooted in the late 19th century, when European Jewish communities facing persecution and pogroms developed Zionism, a nationalist movement proposing the establishment of a Jewish homeland in their ancestral land, where the ancient kingdoms of Israel and Judah existed 2,000 years ago. The land they sought was not empty, but inhabited by Palestinian Arabs who had lived there for over 1,000 years, farming the valleys, building cities, and creating a society that was diverse, containing Muslims, Christians, and a small Jewish minority who had coexisted for centuries. The early Zionist pioneers began arriving in the 1880s, purchasing land from absentee Ottoman landlords and establishing agricultural settlements. Though the land sales often displaced Palestinian tenant farmers who had cultivated the soil for generations without owning the titles. The British took control after World War I, having made contradictory promises to both Arabs and Jews during the war, creating expectations impossible to fulfill simultaneously and setting the stage for conflict that continues today. In 1947, the United Nations proposed partitioning the land into Jewish and Arab states. Though the plan allocated 56% of the territory to the Jewish state, despite Jews owning only 7% of the land and comprising 33% of the population. The Arab leadership rejected the plan, viewing it as unjust. While the Jewish leadership accepted it, seeing it as the best achievable outcome. And in 1948, when Britain withdrew, Israel declared independence, triggering a war that transformed the region. By war's end, Israel controlled 78% of mandatory Palestine, and with 750,000 Palestinians having fled or been expelled in what they call the Nakba, or catastrophe, creating a refugee crisis unresolved 75 years later. In 1967, Israel fought another war lasting 6 days, capturing the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, and Syria's Golan Heights. With the occupation of Palestinian territories continuing today despite international law and UN resolutions demanding withdrawal. Subscribe to Infinite Travel and discover the complex history and current reality of a land where ancient connections and modern politics create a conflict affecting millions, and where understanding requires looking beyond simplified narratives to see humanity on all sides. The city is sacred to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Is containing sites including the Western Wall remaining from the Second Temple, destroyed by Romans in 70 CE, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, built where Christians believe Jesus was crucified and resurrected, and the al-Aqsa Mosque compound, where Muslims believe Muhammad ascended to heaven. The city's history spans over 3,000 years, with archaeological evidence of Canaanite settlement, followed by conquest by King David around 1000 BCE, who made it capital of the United Kingdom of Israel. The city has been conquered and destroyed multiple times by Babylonians, Romans, Crusaders, and others, with each civilization leaving layers that archaeologists continue uncovering beneath the modern city. And the old city is divided into quarters, with the Jewish quarter being rebuilt after 1967, when Jordan's control ended and Israel captured East Jerusalem, with the Muslim quarter being the largest, containing narrow streets, markets, and thousands of Palestinian residents. The al-Aqsa compound sits on the Temple Mount, being the holiest site in Judaism, where the First and Second Temple stood, and being the third holiest site in Islam, creating religious significance that makes the site's control the most sensitive issue. East Jerusalem was captured by Israel in 1967 and annexed despite international law prohibiting annexation of occupied territory, with Israel claiming the entire city as its eternal undivided capital, while Palestinians claim East Jerusalem as capital of their future state. The city demonstrates the conflict's complexity with competing historical narratives, religious claims, and political demands, all focusing on the same sacred stones and ancient streets where three faiths and two peoples both claim belonging that predates the modern conflict. The city in the West Bank, 5 miles south of Jerusalem, is revered as the birthplace of Jesus Christ and of King David 1,000 years earlier, containing the Church of the Nativity, built in the 4th century CE over the grotto, where Christian tradition places Jesus' birth. The city contains approximately 30,000 residents, is predominantly Christian Palestinians, whose population percentage has declined from 85% in 1948 to 12% today, due to emigration driven by economic hardship caused by occupation restrictions and political instability. The Israeli separation barrier cuts through Bethlehem, beginning in 2002, separating the city from Jerusalem and from agricultural lands, with the 8-meter-high concrete wall being visible from most neighborhoods and covered in graffiti, including works by British artist Banksy depicting political commentary and images of hope. The city's economy depends on religious tourism, with millions of pilgrims visiting the Church of the Nativity and other Christian sites annually. Though Israeli control of access means tourists typically stay in Jerusalem and visit Bethlehem only briefly on day trips, reducing economic benefits. The Church of the Nativity is shared between Greek Orthodox, Roman Catholic, and Armenian Apostolic denominations, following centuries-old agreements determining which community controls which parts of the church, with disagreements occasionally erupting into physical confrontations between clergy. The city represents Christianity's Palestinian roots, often overlooked in Western discourse, with the Christian community maintaining presence in Jesus' birthplace, despite pressures that have reduced their numbers dramatically over the past 75 years, creating fears the Christian presence may eventually disappear entirely. The city in the southern West Bank contains 220,000 Palestinians and approximately 800 Israeli settlers living in the old city center under protection of over 1,000 Israeli soldiers, creating one of the occupation's most tense realities. The city is sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims as the burial place of the biblical patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the matriarchs Sarah, Rebecca, and Leah, with the cave of Machpelah or Ibrahimi Mosque being a site of worship and pilgrimage for both religions. The structure was built by King Herod 20 centuries ago with massive stones, characteristic of his construction projects, being later converted to a church by Byzantines and then to a mosque by Muslims who controlled the city for over 1,000 years. The site was divided between a mosque and a synagogue following the 1994 massacre, when an Israeli settler, Dr. Baruch Goldstein, killed 29 Palestinian Muslim worshippers during Ramadan prayers before being killed by survivors, creating trauma that deepened the divide. The old city's main commercial street, Shuhada Street, was once Hebron's thriving market, but has been closed to Palestinians since 2000, with shops being welded shut by Israeli military and with Palestinian residents being forced to enter their homes through back entrances, because front doors open onto streets where only settlers and soldiers are permitted. The small settler population in Hebron is among the most ideologically extreme, just believing they have religious obligation to live in the city where Jewish presence existed for thousands of years, until the 1929 massacre, when Palestinian mobs killed 67 Jews, causing the community to flee. The city demonstrates how historical trauma on both sides fuels current conflict, with Jews remembering the 1929 massacre and Palestinians experiencing current violence and displacement, creating cycles where neither side's suffering invalidates the other's pain, but where finding common ground becomes nearly impossible. The metropolitan area contains approximately 4 million residents, being Israel's economic and cultural center. Built on sand dunes starting in 1909, when Jewish residents of ancient Jaffa established a new neighborhood seeking modern housing. The city grew rapidly during the British Mandate period, with European Jewish immigration, bringing Bauhaus architects who designed over 4,000 buildings in the international style, creating the White City that is UNESCO listed for its concentration of modernist architecture. The city became Israel's first capital in 1948, though the government later moved to Jerusalem, with Tel Aviv remaining the location where most countries maintain embassies, refusing to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital due to its contested status. The city contains museums, including the Tel Aviv Museum of Art, theaters, beaches, and nightlife, creating a cosmopolitan atmosphere that contrasts sharply with the religious character of Jerusalem and with the military realities of the West Bank 30 kilometers away. An adjacent Jaffa is one of the world's oldest ports, with evidence of habitation dating to 7,500 BCE, being mentioned in Egyptian and biblical texts and serving as the main port for Jerusalem throughout history. Jaffa was predominantly Palestinian Arab before 1948, with population exceeding 100,000, being reduced to a few thousand when Israeli forces captured the city in April 1948, and when most residents fled or were expelled. The remaining Jaffa Palestinians and their descendants now number approximately 20,000, living in what is officially Tel Aviv-Yafo, facing gentrification as property values soar, and historic Arab houses are converted to luxury apartments, displacing long-time residents. The merged city represents Israel's modernity and success, while also containing the Palestinian history that preceded the state and the ongoing Arab presence that complicates the narrative of a purely Jewish city. The city, built on the slopes of Mount Carmel overlooking the Mediterranean, is Israel's third largest, with approximately 280,000 residents, including 11% who are Palestinian citizens of Israel. The city was a major Palestinian urban center before 1948, with mixed Arab and Jewish populations. Though during the 1948 war, most Palestinians fled or were expelled when Jewish forces captured the city in April 1948. The city contains the Baha'i World Center, with gardens ascending Mount Carmel in 19 terraces, creating landscaped beauty that is UNESCO listed, is being the world headquarters of the Baha'i faith, whose founders are buried here. The city's port is Israel's largest, handling container shipping and serving as the main gateway for imports and exports that sustain the Israeli economy. The city contains mixed neighborhoods where Palestinian and Jewish citizens live in proximity more than in most Israeli cities. Though segregation remains significant, with most areas being predominantly one community, creating separation even within mixed cities. The city's Palestinian residents are Israeli citizens with voting rights and access to social services, though facing discrimination in housing, employment, education, and police treatment that human rights organizations document regularly. The German colony neighborhood contains restored Templar buildings from the 19th century, when German Christians established settlements in Palestine, seeking to hasten the Second Coming by restoring the Holy Land. With the settlers being expelled by the British during World War I, and the neighborhood now being a trendy dining and shopping district. The city represents coexistence attempts within Israel proper, where Palestinian citizens have formal equality but face practical discrimination, creating frustrations that occasionally erupt into violence. The coastal city in northern Israel contains approximately 50,000 residents, with 30% being Palestinian citizens of Israel, living in a city whose history spans over 4,000 years. The Crusaders made Acre their capital after losing Jerusalem in 1187. With the underground Crusader city being remarkably preserved beneath the Ottoman city built above it, creating archaeological treasures accessible to tourists. The city walls built by Ottomans in the 18th century surround the Old City, which is UNESCO listed for the Crusader remains. Ottoman architecture and urban fabric demonstrating continuous habitation. The city contains a significant Palestinian population that remained after 1948, when most coastal Palestinian cities were emptied, with the community maintaining cultural practices, including fishing traditions in the ancient port. The city experienced serious Jewish-Arab violence in 2021 during the Gaza War, when mobs from both communities attacked people and property based on ethnicity, with synagogues being burned and Arabs being assaulted, creating fears and demonstrating fragility of coexistence even in mixed cities. The city's Khan al-Umdan, or caravanserai of the Pillars, was built by Ottomans as an inn for merchants, with the courtyard surrounded by arched galleries, being restored and now used for cultural events and as tourist attraction. The city demonstrates how historical preservation can occur while current residents face discrimination. With the beautiful restored Ottoman buildings existing alongside Arab neighborhoods, receiving inferior municipal services compared to Jewish areas, revealing inequalities beneath the picturesque surfaces. And the city in northern Israel is the largest Arab city within Israel's pre-1967 borders, containing approximately 80,000 residents who are predominantly Palestinian citizens of Israel, with both Muslim and Christian communities. The city is revered as where Jesus spent his childhood and where the Annunciation occurred according to Christian tradition, with the Church of the Annunciation built over the grotto where tradition places the angel Gabriel's appearance to Mary. The city remained relatively small until the 20th century, growing significantly after 1948, when it absorbed Palestinian refugees from surrounding villages that were destroyed or depopulated. The city faces systematic discrimination from the Israeli government, with municipal budgets being significantly lower per capita than comparable Jewish cities, creating infrastructure gaps, overcrowded schools, and limited industrial zones for economic development. The city has expanded onto surrounding hills, with neighborhoods being built, though Israeli planning restrictions limit expansion compared to the adjacent Jewish city of Nazareth Illit. Built on land confiscated from Nazareth and receiving government support for development that Nazareth is denied. The Basilica of the Annunciation is the largest church in the Middle East, built in 1969 with modern architecture incorporating traditional elements and containing artwork donated by Catholic communities worldwide depicting the Virgin Mary in various cultural styles. The city represents the Palestinian Christian community that predates Islam in the region by centuries, maintaining presence in Jesus' hometown while facing pressures, including discrimination within Israel and difficulties from the broader Israeli-Palestinian conflict that has reduced Christian populations throughout the region. The Salt Lake is 430 meters below sea level, being Earth's lowest land elevation. Sitting in the Jordan Rift Valley between Israel and the West Bank to the west and Jordan to the east. The water is over 30% salt, making it nearly 10 times saltier than oceans, creating buoyancy that makes swimmers float effortlessly and creating mineral concentrations that attract tourists seeking therapeutic mud baths. The sea is shrinking rapidly due to water diversion from the Jordan River for agriculture and drinking water, dropping over 1 meter annually and creating sinkholes along the shores where underground salt layers collapse as fresh water dissolves them. The western shore contains Israeli developments, including hotels, spas, and the ancient fortress of Masada, where Jewish zealots made their last stand against Romans in 73 CE, holding the mountaintop for 3 years before committing mass suicide rather than surrendering. The eastern shore in Jordan contains similar tourist developments, with the sea being a shared resource, requiring cooperation despite political tensions. Though the environmental crisis receives insufficient attention compared to the security and political issues dominating regional discourse. The sea demonstrates environmental challenges transcending political boundaries, with the water crisis affecting everyone, regardless of which government controls the shores, and requiring regional cooperation that political realities make extremely difficult to achieve. The mountaintop fortress built by King Herod between 37 and 31 BCE sits on an isolated rock plateau overlooking the Dead Sea, being the site where Jewish rebels made their final stand against Rome during the First Jewish-Roman War. The fortress contains palace ruins, bathhouses, and storerooms demonstrating Herod's architectural ambitions, with the structures being remarkably preserved by the desert climate that has protected them for 2 millennia. The site became symbol of Jewish resistance after Israeli archaeologist Yigael Yadin excavated it in the 1960s, uncovering evidence supporting historian Josephus's account of the siege and the mass suicide that ended it. The Israeli military held swearing-in ceremonies at Masada for decades, with new soldiers declaring, "Masada shall not fall again," connecting modern Israeli military to ancient Jewish resistance, though the ceremonies became controversial and were eventually moved to the Western Wall. The site is accessible by cable car or by hiking the snake path, ascending 400 meters in brutal heat. With the views from the summit extending across the Dead Sea to Jordan's mountains. The fortress represents how archaeology and history are used to build national narratives. Yes, with Masada being transformed from historical site to symbol of modern Israeli determination to defend Jewish sovereignty, creating a state that would prevent future catastrophes like the Holocaust that destroyed European Jewry. The site is UNESCO listed for the archaeological remains and the historical significance, attracting hundreds of thousands of visitors annually who come to see where ancient history and modern nation building intersect. The city is the largest urban center in Gaza Strip, containing approximately 700,000 residents in the northern part of the coastal territory. The city has ancient history being mentioned in Egyptian texts from the 15th century BCE and being captured by Alexander the Great, by Crusaders, by Mamluks, by Ottomans, and by British before becoming part of Egypt-administered Gaza from 1948 to 1967 when Israel captured it. The city contains the Great Mosque, originally built as a church by Crusaders in the 12th century, being converted to a mosque by Mamluks in the 13th century and being one of Gaza's oldest surviving structures. The city's economy has been devastated by the blockade imposed by Israel and Egypt since 2007 when Hamas took control. With unemployment exceeding 50% and with over 80% of the population depending on humanitarian assistance. The city endured multiple Israeli military operations, including in 2008 to 2009, 2012, 2014, and 2021, causing thousands of deaths, destroying infrastructure, and creating psychological trauma affecting the entire population, especially children who have grown up knowing nothing but blockade and war. The beachfront contains cafes and wedding halls where Gazans seek normalcy despite the abnormal circumstances, with the Mediterranean providing psychological relief from the confinement and the crowding that make Gaza one of the world's most densely populated places. The city represents the extreme humanitarian crisis created by the blockade that restricts movement of people and goods while the population grows and the economy collapses. With international organizations warning that Gaza is becoming uninhabitable while the blockade continues with minimal international pressure for change. The city in the central West Bank serves as the de facto administrative capital for the Palestinian Authority, containing government ministries, international organizations, and NGOs working on development despite having no real sovereignty. The city contains approximately 40,000 residents, with the atmosphere being relatively cosmopolitan compared to other West Bank cities, with cafes, restaurants, art galleries, and cultural venues creating social and intellectual life despite the occupation surrounding it. The city grew rapidly after 1993. Oslo Accords established the Palestinian Authority, with international donors funding government buildings and with returnees from exile establishing businesses and civil society organizations. The city center contains Al-Manara Square, with the lion sculptures being a gathering place for protests, celebrations, and daily life. Surrounded by shops, cafes, and the bustling commercial activity of a city attempting to be normal despite abnormal political circumstances. The Muqata'a compound houses Palestinian Authority headquarters and contains Yasser Arafat's mausoleum, with the compound walls bearing damage from Israeli tank shells fired during incursions in the Second Intifada when Israel besieged Arafat in his headquarters. The city is accessible from Jerusalem through Kalandia checkpoint that can take minutes or hours depending on Israeli security decisions, with the unpredictability making life difficult for the thousands who work in Jerusalem or who need to access services there. The city represents Palestinian attempts to build institutions and maintain culture despite occupation, though the limited sovereignty means the Palestinian Authority controls only civil administration while Israel maintains ultimate security control and can enter at any time, rendering Palestinian self-governance largely symbolic. The city in the Jordan Valley near the Dead Sea is considered one of the world's oldest continuously inhabited cities, with archaeological evidence of settlement dating to 9000 BCE in the Neolithic period. The ancient city at Tel Sultan contains 23 layers of civilization built upon previous settlements, creating a mound, revealing human history spanning 11,000 years with pottery, walls, and tools, documenting how societies evolved. The city appears in biblical accounts as the first city conquered by Israelites entering Canaan under Joshua's leadership, with the walls supposedly falling after Israelites marched around them for 7 days, though archaeologists debate whether evidence supports the narrative. The city contains approximately 20,000 residents, living in one of the few areas of the West Bank under full Palestinian Authority civil and security control. Though Israel controls the borders and the Jordan Valley area surrounding the city, limiting Palestinian sovereignty. The city's economy is based on agriculture, with date palms, citrus groves, and banana plantations being cultivated, using irrigation from springs, feeding an oasis in the desert climate, where summer temperatures regularly exceed 40 degrees Celsius. The Monastery of the Temptation is built into the cliff face above the city, marking the traditional site where Jesus fasted for 40 days and was tempted by Satan, according to Christian tradition, accessible by cable car offering views across the city and the valley. The ancient city demonstrates continuous human habitation longer than almost anywhere else on Earth, showing how the Jordan Valley's water sources sustained life through millennia, while empires rose and fell around it, leaving archaeological evidence but never stopping the pattern of people living, farming, and building on the same location their ancestors occupied thousands of years earlier. The city in the northern West Bank sits between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, containing approximately 150,000 residents and being known for resistance during both intifadas and for preserving traditional Palestinian culture. The city was founded by Romans in 72 CE as Flavia Neapolis, with the current name being Arabic adaptation of the Roman original, though the location was inhabited before the Romans arrived. The old city contains a historic kasbah, with soap factories producing traditional olive oil soap, using methods unchanged for centuries. With the soap being exported across the Middle East before Israeli restrictions on movement made trade difficult. The city is famous for kanafe, a sweet cheese pastry that Nablus claims as its specialty. With shops in the old city producing the dessert fresh daily, and with locals being intensely proud of their version's superiority to imitations elsewhere. The city contains Jacob's Well, where according to biblical tradition, the patriarch Jacob dug a well 3,700 years ago. With the well being over 40 meters deep and still containing water inside a Greek Orthodox church built above it. The city is surrounded by Israeli settlements, including Elon Moreh, built on hilltops overlooking the city, with the settlements being ideologically motivated communities established by religious Jews believing they have divine right to the land regardless of international law or Palestinian objections. The Balata refugee camp on Nablus's outskirts contains 30,000 residents in 1 square kilometer. No being the West Bank's largest refugee camp and a center of resistance where armed groups operate and where Israeli military raids are frequent, creating ongoing tensions. The city demonstrates Palestinian urban life continuing despite occupation, with commerce, education, culture, and resistance all coexisting in a place that has been continuously inhabited for 2 millennia. The Zionist movement began in the late 19th century, when European Jewish communities, facing pogroms in Russia and anti-Semitism across Europe, developed nationalism, seeking to establish Jewish sovereignty in their ancestral homeland. Theodor Herzl published Der Judenstaat in 1896, proposing the creation of a Jewish state. with the first Zionist Congress meeting in Basel, and Switzerland in 1897, establishing the World Zionist Organization that would work toward that goal. The early pioneers, or Halutzim, began arriving in Ottoman Palestine in the 1880s and 1890s, purchasing land from absentee Arab landlords, often living in Beirut or Damascus, who sold properties they had never visited to Jewish buyers, offering prices exceeding market value. The Jewish National Fund, established in 1901, collected donations from Jews worldwide to purchase land, acquiring approximately 230,000 dunams by 1914 and over 1 million dunams by 1947, though this represented only 7% of Palestine's total area. The land purchases often displaced Palestinian tenant farmers who had cultivated the soil for generations without owning titles, and with the farmers being evicted when the land changed hands, creating resentment and early tensions between incoming Jews and resident Arabs. The settlements established on purchased land were agricultural communities organized as moshavim or kibbutzim, using collective or cooperative farming models that early Zionists believed would create the new Jew, who worked the land rather than being confined to European ghettos. The purchases were legal under Ottoman and later British law, though Palestinians viewed the growing Jewish presence and the land acquisitions as threatening their majority status and their future, creating resistance that began with attacks on settlements in the early 20th century, before the State of Israel existed. The British captured Palestine from Ottomans during World War I, having made the Balfour Declaration in 1917, promising to facilitate the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, while also promising Arabs independence in exchange for fighting against Ottomans. The League of Nations granted Britain the Mandate for Palestine in 1920, with explicit responsibility to implement the Balfour Declaration while also safeguarding the rights of the existing non-Jewish population, creating contradictory obligations that Britain struggled to balance. The Jewish population grew from approximately 60,000 in 1918 to over 600,000 by 1947 through immigration that Arabs opposed. And with tensions erupting into violence, including the 1929 Hebron massacre, when Arab mobs killed 67 Jews, and the 1936 to 1939 Arab Revolt, when Palestinians rebelled against British rule and Jewish immigration. The British proposed various partition plans attempting to separate Jewish and Arab populations, with the 1937 Peel Commission recommending dividing Palestine into Jewish and Arab states plus British-controlled zones. Though the plan was rejected by Arabs and ultimately abandoned by British. The Holocaust during World War II killed 6 million European Jews, creating urgency among survivors seeking refuge, with many attempting to reach Palestine despite British quotas limiting immigration to appease Arabs and prevent violence. leading to illegal immigration and to confrontations with British authorities. Note, the British announced in 1947 they would withdraw from Palestine and ask the United Nations to determine the territory's future, ending 30 years of mandate administration that failed to resolve the competing demands and that left behind a situation guaranteed to explode into violence once British forces departed. The United Nations proposed partitioning Palestine in November 1947 into Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem being internationalized, allocating 56% of the land to the Jewish state, despite Jews comprising 33% of the population and owning 7% of the land. The Jewish leadership accepted the partition plan, viewing it as the best achievable outcome and as fulfillment of Zionist goals for sovereignty. While Arab leadership rejected the plan, viewing it as unjust seizure of land and as violation of Palestinian majority rights. Violence erupted immediately, with both sides attacking the other's communities, with Jewish forces capturing mixed cities, including Haifa and Jaffa, before British withdrawal, and with Palestinian forces attacking Jewish convoys and settlements, creating chaos across the territory. Israel declared independence on May 14, 1948, when the British mandate ended. With neighboring Arab armies invading the next day, attempting to prevent the Jewish state's establishment, though Arab forces were poorly coordinated and less effective than expected. The war ended in 1949, with Israel controlling 78% of mandatory Palestine, including territories allocated to the Arab state in the partition plan, and with Jordan occupying the West Bank and Egypt occupying Gaza, while no Palestinian Arab state was created as the partition plan envisioned. Approximately 750,000 Palestinians fled or were expelled during the war in what Palestinians call the Nakba, or catastrophe. With over 400 Palestinian villages being destroyed or depopulated, and with refugees being prevented from returning when the war ended. The causes of the refugee flight are debated, with Israeli historians documenting expulsions, massacres, including at Deir Yassin, and policies designed to prevent Palestinian return, while others emphasize Arab leaders telling Palestinians to flee temporarily until Arab armies won the war. The war created Israel as permanent reality and created the Palestinian refugee crisis as unresolved tragedy. And with both peoples viewing the events through incompatible narratives, where one side's independence is the other side's catastrophe, making historical consensus impossible. The war beginning, June 5, 1967, lasted 6 days, transforming the region's map when Israel defeated Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, capturing the Sinai Peninsula, Gaza Strip, West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Golan Heights. The war began when Israel launched preemptive strikes, destroying the Egyptian Air Force on the ground after Egypt closed the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping. and after Egypt, Jordan, and Syria mobilized armies on Israel's borders, creating fears of existential threat. The Israeli military captured the West Bank from Jordan, including East Jerusalem and the Old City. With Israeli paratroopers reaching the Western Wall and photographs of soldiers crying at Judaism's holiest accessible site, becoming iconic images of Israeli military success and spiritual homecoming. The war transformed Israel from a small, vulnerable state into a regional military power, controlling territories 3 times larger than its pre-war size. With the victory creating confidence that some call hubris and that others view as justified pride in survival against overwhelming odds. The occupation of Palestinian territories began in 1967 as a supposedly temporary situation until peace agreements could be negotiated. Though 57 years later, the occupation continues with no end in sight, and with settlements making withdrawal increasingly difficult, practically and politically. The United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 242 calling for Israeli withdrawal from occupied territories in exchange for peace, recognition, and secure borders, becoming the basis for decades of negotiations that have produced limited results, while the facts on the ground have changed dramatically through settlement expansion. The war created the territorial basis for the current conflict, with Palestinians seeking statehood in the West Bank and Gaza, captured in 1967, while Israel controls the territories through military occupation that international law considers illegal and that successive Israeli governments have deepened rather than ended. Palestine and Israel contain approximately 14 million people, split roughly equally between Jews and Arabs living between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, in a land approximately the size of New Jersey. The conflict continues with no resolution in sight, despite decades of negotiations producing Oslo Accords that created limited Palestinian self-governance without ending occupation or addressing core issues, including refugees, Jerusalem, settlements, and borders. No, the international community supports a two-state solution, with Israel and Palestine existing side by side in peace and security. Though settlement expansion has made the territorial basis for such a solution increasingly difficult to implement. The younger generations on both sides are growing up with less hope than their parents, with Israelis fearing terrorism and existential threats while building a prosperous economy and strong military, and with Palestinians experiencing occupation restrictions while maintaining culture and demanding rights and freedom. The human cost is real, with thousands killed in wars and violence over the past 75 years. With families on both sides grieving losses, and with trauma being passed through generations, creating cycles difficult to break. The path forward requires acknowledging that both peoples have legitimate historical connections to the land, that both have suffered greatly, that neither is going anywhere, and that the only realistic future involves sharing the land, whether in one state, two states, or some confederation that has not yet been imagined. Subscribe to Infinite Travel for more journeys through places where history is contested, where the present is painful, where simple answers do not exist, and where understanding requires seeing humanity on all sides while never excusing injustice wherever it occurs.